Right, hello, we are back. After the summer break, we are now back, and Parsha Shiur is resuming with Parsha Shoftim. So, Parsha Shoftim is a quick overview in the Parsha. The Parsha begins, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha, the appointment of judges in every city. Then the Parsha carries on and talks about the prohibition of idolatry and sorcery. And then there is the appointment of a king. Then it deals with the Parsha of Arei Miklot, the cities of refuge for someone who kills B'shogeg. And then there are rules of war, the exceptions of those people who are exempt from war. And finally, the Parsha of Eglo Arufa, that very sort of enigmatic story of a person who is found. No one knows who killed him. And that whole episode of Egla Rufa. So that is really Parsha Shoftim. What I'd like to do this evening is pick out three very interesting ideas from the Parsha. And the first one I saw originally from Reb Simcha Bunim of Peshischa. It was quoted in his name. I looked on my Otza HaChochma, I couldn't find it. I saw his Sfarim and his Torah, but it wasn't. I couldn't see it. But I did see the same idea in the name of Reb Eliezer Bloch, who's one of the great Telzi Rosh Hashivas. So whether it's a Hasidic Torah or whether it's Litvish Torah, it's certainly a good idea, and it's certainly Torah. So let's take a look. If you're listening online, email me please at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. The Parsha begins, this is in box number 1, Shoftim v'shotrim titin lechol b'chol sharecha. The appointment of judges to administer the whole justice system in every town. V'shoftu esa'om mishpat tzedek, loisatem mishpat, you can't deviate, v'loisakir ponim, you can't show favoritism, etc., etc. Tzedek, tzedek tirdoif. And then the famous words, you shall pursue righteousness, leman tichya, in order that you should live, yirash ha'aretz asher Hashem lekecha noisin lach. Okay, that's the opening 3 psukim of this week's Parsha. The question that some grapple with is why tzedek, tzedek tirdoif? It should just say tzedek tirdoif, pursue righteousness. Why the double expression of tzedek, tzedek tirdoif? So let's take a look at the Pnei Das of Rabbi Eliezer Bloch. This is his understanding of the repetition of tzedek, tzedek. V'nirli gamkein, this is in the next box, leva'eh, tzedek tirdoif, shegam ha-tzedek tirdoif b'tzedek. Even when you pursue righteousness, you have to do so in a righteous way. That when I'm running after righteousness, I'll use whatever means I can to get there. Even if they're not so straight. Says Rabbi Eliezer Bloch, that when you pursue tzedek, righteousness, you have to do so righteously. Let me give you an anecdote, story, which I think brings out the point better than I can describe. The story is told of Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. That Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the great Rosh Hashiva of Kol Torah, and the great Pesach of the last generation, he would give a daily shiur in his yeshiva in Kol Torah. And although he was sort of the internationally world-renowned Pesach and figure, he didn't talk about other matters in his daily shiur in yeshiva. He just stuck to the daf and to the sugya at hand, with one exception, so far as I know. One exception was that he came into the shiur on a Sunday morning and he looked a bit distressed. He sat down and before he opened his Gemara, he said, "Boys, I just need to share something with you." He said, "How could it be?" He described an event that he saw the day before, that he was walking in Shari Chesed to shul and he noticed a young man walking with his father, and the father was carrying a bench. So Shlomo Zalman knew the young man. He said, "Shalom Aleichem, good Shabbos." He said, "Where are you off to?" So the Chassan proudly said that today is my ofruf. Mazel tov. Tell me, why is your father carrying a bench? So he said, the Chassan said, "Well, we needed to take the bench somewhere, but I don't use the eruv, and therefore my father is carrying it." Shlomo Zalman was so distressed that he had to share that with the boys. He says, "How could that be?" He said, even if he doesn't want to use the eruv, you don't get your father to schlep a bench for you. You take it there before Shabbos, you get somebody else to do it. How can a man, a young boy, a chassan, walk down the street next to his father who's schlepping a bench because the son wants to be mahadir not to use the eruv? That is a good example of tzedek, tzedek tirdoif. When you pursue tzidkas, you have to do so righteously and not at anybody else's expense. There's sometimes I come across this in school, that there are boys and girls who have lofty aspirations. They have holy aspirations that they want to take on, and they want to steig, and they want to advance and take on certain chumras, and it needs to be done with chachma. So I can have a young man in the Beis Medrash come and, he wants to take on a chumrah. What does he want to do? He wants to, wear a gartel. He wants to grow a beard. Something which is over and above normative halacha. So again, you discuss it with him. Or a young lady, let's say in the girls' school, she wants to, take on a certain standard in kashrus and only eat certain hechsherim. Well, these are very fine and lofty aspirations, but my initial question is, why are you doing it? What do your parents think about it? How will it impact your home life? Is now the right time to do it? And you need to just explore that. Because if you take on a chumrah and it's at the expense of somebody else who is not certainly comfortable with it and it's not always appropriate, then that is perhaps what the Pasuk is telling us. Sedek tirdoif, one has to pursue tzidkus, righteousness, but in a righteous way. Okay, let's press on. Now, as I said, the Parsha continues and talks about the appointment of a king. And this is something fascinating I saw many years ago from an email of Rabbi Frand, which I kept and put away. And this is a very beautiful idea, which I think is very relevant for this time of year, as sort of a new season, new beginning. Schools are starting, yeshivas are starting, a new zman. So the Pasuk says as follows, V'hoya k'shivtei al kisei mamlachtei. The Pasuk is describing the appointment of a new king, and it will be when the king sits on his throne. V'kosav lo es Mishnah HaTorah hazos, he has to write Mishnah Torah al Sefer milifnei haKohanim haLevim. So the king famously has his own Sefer Torah. Now, the way it's described is k'shivtei al kisei mamlachtei. Now that's notable. We'll come back to that in a moment, because there's a similar pasuk in Megillas Esther. In the Megillah, in the first parak, it says, "Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh," the famous opening words of Megillas Esther, "Bayomim hoheim kasheves hamelech Achashverosh al kisei malchusei." When Achashverosh was sitting on his throne, Asher b'shushan habiro. Now, a very similar phrase appears in Sefer Shoftim. The pasuk says in Parak Yud Aleph, "B'sheves Yisrael." So it's interesting, says the Medrash in Esther Rabbah, that when it comes to the Jewish king in Sefer Shoftim, it says B'sheves Yisrael, and when it says in reference to Achashverosh, it says Kasheves HaMelech. Why the difference? Says the Medrash in Esther Rabbah in the first Parsha, Kasheves HaMelech, referring to Achashverosh, Omer Yitzchak, Umas Ha'eloham Ein Lohem Yeshiva. A wicked king like Achashverosh, his kingship, his kingdom, and his own reign will not endure. Ein lohem yeshiva. And therefore it says kasheves, which is temporary, when he reigns, when he sits. B'sheves hamelech in ksiv kan ela kasheves hamelech. Yeshiva she'ena yeshiva. It's a temporary type of reigning. Avol yeshivas and shel Yisrael yeshiva. But the yeshiva, the reign of a Jewish king, of a righteous Jewish king, that is enduring, that has longevity. As it says, quoting the Pasuk in Shoftim Yud Aleph, i.e. in Sefer Shoftim, B'sheves Yisrael, etc., B'cheshbon B'mneseho. So therefore, says the Medrash, there's a rule. When it comes to a wicked non-Jewish king like Achashverosh, it says Kasheves, which is like a temporary reign. But when it comes to a Jewish king who's righteous and whose reign should endure, it says B'sheves. The difficulty, of course, is that our pasuk in this week's parsha says V'hoya k'shivtei. It breaks the trend. It goes against our rule, because k'shivtei is used in terms of Achashverosh. It's a temporary thing. What's going on? So again, this is both. I've seen this referred in the answer in the Chidush Yarim and in the writings of Shalom Mordechai Shvadron. That's the grandfather of Shalom Shvadron. Is named after him. He actually, Shalom Shvadron, the famous Magen Yerushalayim, he brought out, if I'm not mistaken, many of the Shailas and Shuvas of Shalom Mordechai Shvadron, his grandfather, I think it was, and he wrote a sefer on Parsha called Tcheles Mordechai, and he answers Yas's question, and he gives a fascinating answer, which also is said in the name of the Chidush Yarim. he asked the question as I just described. Why is it in this week's Seder it says Kashifta al Kisim Mamlachtoi, which is Kashifta, which is the way to describe a temporary reign like Achashverosh Beyomhim Kasheves HaMelech. Says the Tcheles Mordechai. V'omno. Kol, the second paragraph, I'm on the paragraph 2a. Kol haischadshus poel hisragshus hanefes. Whenever you begin a new enterprise, there's a certain freshness. There's a certain, a spring in a person's step. I saw it this morning in school. It was the first day back for our boys and our girls in the girls' school. You see there's a certain freshness. Only a few weeks ago, everyone was tired. They were lethargic. It was more of an effort. Today, to give shiur today was much easier because there's a certain freshness that combines any new start. V'chol melech b'aschola hu shofel b'daito el mekabel al atzmei el malchus shamayim. And it's true with the king as well. When he begins his reign, he wants to make it work. He starts off, he's mekabel el malchus shamayim. He is humble. He wants to serve the people. Zulas, that's zul achakach. However, b'meshech hazman heger nasa teva. Nature kicks in. You go back to the sort of doing things by rote, as it were. Umedame benafshe ki koichei va'otzem yodei osli kol zeis. He sort of pats himself on the back and says, "What a great king am I." V'zeu shezhira Torah sheyiyeh tomid k'moi be'es shivto al kisei mamlachtoi. The Torah is warning us about this and is telling us when it says in this week's Parsha v'hoya k'shivto al kisei mamlachtoi that he should always continue his reign like he did at the initial stages of the reign. Just like at the beginning, at the outset of his reigning, he did so with a humility, with aspirations to be Mekabel al Malchus Shamayim, to be a loyal servant to his nation. Well, so too he should continue with that spirit, with that outlook for the whole of his reign. So the Torah, the rule is there. The rule is always the same. With the Jewish king, it's b'sheves, it should be an enduring long reign. And with the wicked non-Jewish king, it should be ksheves. Why does our pasuk say kashivta al kisei mamlachtoi? Because it's talking about a different thing. It's reminding the king that he should sort of continue with the same spirit and motivation as he began his reign. Just like he was pumped to do well, well, so too people become jaded despite the best of intentions, and therefore the Torah is reminding us of maintaining that initial inspiration. It's interesting, it's true in all areas of life. You have in a relationship, you have in a marriage. It's called a honeymoon. Why is it called a honeymoon? Because it doesn't last forever. With the best of intentions, that's life. Things, do move on. A person that doesn't have that initial excitement, it doesn't last. The Gemara says, "Chosn doime lemelech," and therefore, in the same way that the melech is told, you've got to try and maintain the initial excitement and inspiration and motivation. Well, so too with the chosn as well, and with all aspects of life. If you turn over the page, there's something very interesting. When there's a pasuk in Hosea that every man knows, that when he puts on tefillin in the morning, he puts on the shel yad, he puts on the shel rosh, and then he wraps around the ritzuas, the tefillin straps on his arm and his hand, in a specific way. And he says the pasuk from Hosea, Ve'erastach li la'olam, it's a beautiful pasuk. Ve'erastach li la'olam, I will bind myself to you forever. Ve'erastach li b'tzedek u'v'mishpat, I will bind myself to you with tzedek and with mishpat, u'v'chesed u'v'rachmim, ve'erastach li be'emunah, v'yodat es Hashem. It's an absolutely beautiful pasuk. I remember one time going into class in school, and a certain lady, Kodesh teacher, a brilliant teacher, she was teaching this pasuk. She was teaching the Haftarahs, and she was teaching Hosea, and the girls was learning, and I told them, do you know that men say this pasuk every time they put on tefillin shel yad? And it's a beautiful pasuk to say, but if you think about the pasuk, the first three words seem to be an inherent contradiction. Because it says Ve'erastach li la'olam. Now we know in any marriage there are two stages. There's the erusin and the nisuin. The erusin is equivalent loosely to the engagement, and then the nisuin is the marriage. Technically nowadays we do this both parts of the ceremony under the chuppah. But the erusin is the shorter term engagement type of relationship, and then you have the nisuin. So how can you say Ve'erastach li la'olam? Erusin is not la'olam. Erusin is short term. 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, you get married. Erusin is the engagement. How can it be verastach li'olam? Rav Palm used to say that the prayer is that the erusin, the excitement, the engagement, the young chosen, the young kala, they can't wait to see each other, that should be la'olam. That feeling should continue la'olam. And that's what we're saying, that our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have that excitement, but it should be the erusin excitement, but it should be la'olam. And I think that's also, I once heard that in Ma'ariv we have a similar idea. Certainly in Nusach Ashkenaz we say, in Ma'ariv Avas Olam Beis Yisrael, it should be an Avas Olam, an everlasting love. And then we say, V'avoschal tosim en l'olamim. Well, how can you do that? If it's an everlasting love, what do you mean by V'avoschal tosim en l'olamim? Don't remove the love. It's going to be. We just said it's an eternal, it's a permanent love. The teretz is that it should be permanent, but it should be ba'ofen, that it has that initial excitement, that it's like a fresh, temporary type of love, but la'olam. It's the verastach li'olam. It's the same idea. And then famously, that's what we began saying L'David Hashem Ori today. It's the same idea, the famous idea that it says, Achas sho'alti mi'eis Hashem, shivti b'veis Hashem kol yemei chayai, to dwell in the house of Hashem for all the days of my life. Lachazos b'nam Hashem, or levaker be'echoloi. Levaker means to visit. So which one is it? Is it shivti b'veis Hashem kol yemei chayai, or is it levaker? The teretz is that it should be both. Of course, it should be shifty b'veis Hashem kol yemei chayai, but it should be ba'ofen ulevaker. It should be with a feeling of bikur, of freshness, of excitement, of newness. That's really the theme that emerges. So, a very beautiful idea alluded to in that one letter, v'hoya kashifte al kisei mamlachtoi, that really, even though the Jewish king is b'sheves Israel, here he's being warned, make sure you take that initial motivation and feeling, and you should make that permanent. Okay, let's press on with one final idea. This is also a magnificent idea. I forget where I saw it, to be honest, but a very, very beautiful idea. At the end of the Parsha, we talk about battle. And I think this, we'll see, this I think is an appropriate idea to mention this week in particular. The Pasuk says towards the end of the Sedra, this is in paragraph 3, the first box in paragraph 3, we're talking about war, the rules of war. The Nigash HaKohen El Ha'am, V'dibel Ha'am, and the Kohen is known as the Kohen Meshuach Milchama. He's appointed for this reason to give a pep talk to the soldiers before they go out to battle. And he gives them a talk, and the Torah describes what he says. And then it says, Ki totzu al ha'ir yomim rabim le'lachim oleh le'sofso, you're going to do a sort of a siege on the city. Lo sashchis etz eitzol in doyach olav garzen. Don't, as you go into the city, cut down any fruit trees. This is the famous prohibition against cutting down fruit trees. Ki mimenu teichel ve'eisol l'sichros. Okay, so Parshas Shoftim deals with the Meshuach Milchama, giving the pep talk to the people before they go out to battle. And then Hashchosa Silonis, the prohibition not to destroy trees, fruit trees. And then it continues with the theme of war, with all the exceptions, etc., of who doesn't go to battle. And then, at the very end of the Seder, you have Egla Arufa. You have Egla Arufa at the very end of the Parsha, which is that where a person is killed, we don't know who the murderer is, and we have to work out the nearest city to this anonymous dead person. End of Parshas Shoftim. And then, in next week's Parsha, in Parshas Kiseitze, the Pasuk begins, Kiseitze la melchama levecha, that we pick up on the theme of war at the beginning of next week's Parsha. So if you think about it, you've got a very strange sequence of events. You've got the Kohen Meshuach Milchama talking about war, with all the rules of war. You've then got Egla Arufa in the middle, and then it continues with the theme of war in next week's Parsha. Why is Egla Arufa sort of inserted into the middle of the context of war? It seems a bit random and unnecessary, inappropriate. That's question number one. Now, question number two, the Meshuach Milchama in this week's Parsha, he sets out 4 exceptions to people who do not need to go to battle. The Pasuk says, I'm in the last box on the page, Kiseitze la milchama alovecha, this is in this week's Sedra, etc. The Nigash HaKohen v'dibel ha'am. the Mashuach Melchama will speak to the people and will say, Al yerech levavchem al tiru. Don't be scared, don't be worried. That's number one. The first exception is someone who's just too scared to do battle. Next exception. Mi ha'esh asher bona bayis chodesh v'lo chanocha. Who is the person who built a new home and hasn't inducted it, hasn't sort of lived in it yet? Yelech v'yosher lebeisa, he should go home. That's the second exception. Third exception. Mi ha'esh asher nota kerem v'lo chidlo. Who planted a vineyard and hasn't enjoyed the fruit of his work. That's the third. Yelech v'yosher lebeisa. And then fourthly, he's engaged to be married and has not lived with his wife. He should again go home. So you've got 4 exceptions to people who are exempt from engaging in battle. A person who's scared, who's just got married, who's just planted a vineyard and just built a new house. Now these are very strange exceptions. Nowadays you get a letter to serve on a jury, and you write back and you say that I've just planted a vineyard, I can't come, it's not going to succeed. It won't get you off jury service. So there's strange exceptions. So that's the second issue. So the first question is, why is Egla Rufa inserted in the theme of battle? The second question is, why these strange exceptions? And a third question, which I've always wondered about, is why is it that these 4 categories of people have to come to the battlefront, to the field. The Mashuach Melchama will stand up and will give his speech, and then he will send them home. Why make them come in the first place? Everyone knows the rules. If you've got one of these 4 exceptions, then just stay home. Why do you have to come to the battlefield to hear it and then go home? 3 questions. Why Egla Rufa in the middle of the Parsha, or the end talking about war? Why these strange exceptions? And why make these 4 categories of people come and then send them home? The answer I once saw is this. When you talk about battle, you run the risk of losing the value of human life. You hear on the news, whether it's in Eretz Israel, or whether it's in Ukraine, or in the news today, I heard, I can't remember exactly what the details were, of 12 people killed in a crossing a ferry or something. When you hear this news constantly, the challenge is to retain the value of human life. And that is one of the dangers of war. You run the risk of losing the value of human life. Wars are not normal. Wars should not be how the world is meant to be. Egla Arufa essentially teaches us the value of human life. You've got one anonymous corpse. You don't know who he is, you don't know who killed him, you don't know the circumstances of his death. And there's a whole process. The Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim have to come, and then the Sanhedrin of the Beis Din of the closest town have to come and find out, to come out to this dead anonymous person who basically people didn't care enough about. They didn't accompany him or whatever the reason is. So Egla Rufa, if you like, indirectly, we're making such a whole ceremony and such a fuss about an anonymous corpse. It's teaching us the value of human life. So therefore, in the middle of the Parsha of war, we need a lesson, a reminder about the value of human life, because war and battle run the risk of losing the value of human life. And that's why you've got these 3 very curious exemptions. A person who's scared, I can understand, he's not going to be on the battlefield because he's a liability. But the other 3 exceptions, before we go to war, we remind ourselves that Judaism, the Yiddishkeit, values building over destroying, and we value people and their contributions, even though we recognize the sad and occasional need for war. So we talk about building homes and building vineyards and getting married and building families because we want to hear that. We need to, that is part of the pep talk. So the Mashuach Melchama will bring everybody there and we'll say, look, we now have to go to this sad and sadly necessary, occasionally necessary thing called war. But before we engage in battle, which runs the risks of losing the value of human life, let's just remind ourselves what life is about. Life is about building and about contributing and about making homes and building vineyards and getting married and having families. That's what it's really about. And then he gives the pep talk and they go off to war. So the whole purpose of these strange exemptions is to remind us about the sanctity and the value of human life. And that's perhaps why we make them come and then we send them home. Because if you want to give a message, it's not enough that they just stay at home. You want to bring them there, make this powerful talk, and then they go home, because that makes much more of an impression to remind us about the value of human life. And I think it's an appropriate thing to mention this week in particular. We all woke up on Sunday morning with that devastating news of the 6 hostages who were killed. The more you look about it, look into each one. Here in London in Hasmonean, we knew one of them, Ori, that his father came to school on a couple of occasions, and his poster was up in our school, and we sort of knew him. But that's just one person. Each person is their own world. And that's really what the Parsha of Egla Rufa is teaching us, the value of human life. And it's sort of counterbalancing the dangers of war, where you lose the value of human life. So let's just review the 3 ideas that we mentioned this evening in Parsha Shoftim. Number 1, tzedek tirdoif, that we should pursue righteousness, but in a righteous way. That we shouldn't sort of take on righteousness and just sort of blast things out of the way if they get in the way of our pursuit of tzedek. It's tzedek tirdoif, to pursue righteousness, but in a righteous way. Then we discussed that very beautiful idea of kashifta al kisei mamlachtoi. The general rule is that when it comes to a Jewish king, it's b'sheves, it's enduring. With a wicked non-Jewish king like Achashverosh, it's kasheves, it's temporary. So how come in our parsha says v'hoya kashifta? The answer is because sometimes a Jewish king, he goes in with the right intentions, but then with the passing of time, he becomes jaded and he forgets his initial motivation. So therefore, the Torah is telling us, retain your initial enthusiasm and motivation. It should be kashivtai. Remember how it was when you first started, and maintain that inspiration. And we see that in many other situations. We see that the initial excitement should last forever. That it should always be an exciting and fresh love. And that's L'Dovet Hashem Oiri, the famous idea of Shifti Beveis Hashem Kol Yimei Chayai, but Levaker Behecholei. It should be Kol Yimei Chayai, but it should be with the freshness and the excitement of that initial visit. That's the importance of maintaining the excitement for a longer term. And then finally, the value of human life. The 3 questions we asked, that why is Egla Rufa in the middle of the Parsha discussing battle at the end of this week's Sedra, at the beginning of next week's Sedra? Why is it sort of sandwiched in between there? Why these strange exceptions, and why make them come and then send them home? The answers we've discussed is because Egla Rufa teaches us the value of human life. And that's meant to counterbalance the dangers of battle and of war, where we run the risk of losing the value of human life. And therefore, specifically, we have the Parsha of Egla Rufa bang in the middle to teach us that. And that's why these strange exceptions are not strange, because each one is reminding us about the value of what life is really about building, of contributing to society, etc. And therefore, to make that point, we bring them to the battle zone and then we send them home. Mitzvah Hashem, we should have B'suras Tovos Meretz Yisrael. Wishing everyone a very good Shabbos.